Hello, and welcome to Scott's Odyssey. Along the old William Penn Highway, or Route 22, as you travel through the Allegheny Portage Railroad's historic location for the 10 inclines, you may notice something out of the corner of your eye on the edge of the highway. While climbing the Crescent Mountain to the Crescent Summit from the east, if you look carefully to the south side of the road, right where it forks and you don't blink, you may be lucky enough to catch it. What is it? It's the lone grave of the Alleghenies. See you in a minute. Welcome back. If you've watched my videos before, thank you for your patronage, and if you're new to Scott's Odyssey, welcome aboard. As we talked about in the Skewed Arch video, there were not many locations where you could travel on a road and get from east side of the Alleghenies to the west. This road, known as the William Penn Highway, is the second way to cross the Alleghenies in Pennsylvania, the first road being former Route 1 turned into Route 30, known as the Lincoln Highway. William Penn Highway, or Route 22 as it was more often referred to throughout the late 1800s and into the 1900s, was a common road used for transport of goods through the Alleghenies and as a way to often get goods to the incline that could take the product to waiting trains or canal boats for a journey to Pittsburgh. This route, although not busy in the modern manner of which we would consider hustling and bustling, was actually one of the more frequently used roads in Pennsylvania. So much so that a famous inn was established smack on the side of the mountain plateau halfway up to the summit, named the Fountain Inn, which we'll probably end up having a video on that one in all due time. Which brings us to a story about a site that has existed on this road since 1905 and would be visible to every motorist who has traveled past it for the better part of 116 years. As the story goes, it was back on June 29th of 1905 when Amandus Miller and George Miller were fishing the stream between the Fountain Inn, named after the spring just above it, called the Font of 8 because it was a spring or fountain just next to Incline 8, and the Muleshoe Curve Culvert, which is the famously curved railroad run that is in the shape of a mule shoe versus its bigger brother Horseshoe Curve just 4 miles away as the crow flies. George was the son of Amandus Miller, who was a checkweighman for the Taylor and McCoy mines about 2 miles away over near Gallitzin. They had left their horse and buggy at the Fountain Inn and started walking the stream down toward the culvert, seeing if there was anything worth pulling out of the water. Just a simple, relaxing day of fishing with no real reason beyond hanging out and having fun, especially because if they wanted fish, the pond out front of the Fountain Inn was stocked full of large stock trout. Harry Goldie was the son of John Goldie, the proprietor of the Fountain Inn, and had drove the team and buggy down to the culvert in order to meet the Millers and bring them back up to the Fountain Inn. On their way back up the steep road, the two boys noticed something odd just off the road in the woods. What they saw was a man hanging on a tree limb. When they reached the inn, they immediately sought out Harry Goldie. The four of them and a handful of others traveled back down to where the man was hanging in order to investigate what they saw. When they arrived at the site, what they found was a man whom was hanging by a belt on a low branch of the tree just 2 feet off the ground. The original newspaper story says he was hanging there for at least a month, but based on the fact that they were still able to identify him as a white male of about 45 years of age, would dictate he was still in the early to mid stages of bloat, so was probably only there for 10 to not more than 15 days. This does not mean that the sight was an easy one to swallow. The man was bad enough to not be recognizable and had already lost his eyes and tongue to the local birds. Upon further investigation, they found a coat with a pocketbook containing $29.50, according to the very first newspaper information release, as well as a piece of paper and a knife. Goldie drove the rest of the way down the mountain to Duncansville, where he got in contact with the authorities. In short time, Deputy Coroner H.W. McCartney, a name which appears quite frequently in these videos, which leads me to believe he was a very busy man, arrived with the Blair County almshouse owner and caretaker, Professor P.H. Brindenbaugh, who was the former principal at the refractory Indian school that performed re-education and indoctrination of Native American children in the 1860s, and undertaker Christian Liebgott. Oddly enough, Christian Liebgott came from a family of German morticians and undertakers. But why did I feel a need for a sarcasm shot on this video? Well, I found it amusing and wanted to share with you that the undertaker's last name, Liebgott, means dear God. Because of the decomposition and animal damage to this man's body, obscuring the ability to identify who he was, and the fact that there was no evidence of theft of his belongings or his money, the obvious distance from the road as to not being very far, but far enough, the coroner decided that no further investigation was required, no foul play was evident, and that this man obviously committed suicide. The further deduction of the coroner was that the man had decidedly placed his belongings and coat a specific distance close to where he would have masterminded his deed to be done, climbed the tree, adjusted the belt accordingly, and swung himself off the limb to his own demise, making his decision premeditated, again justifying the conclusion of suicide. Let me know in the comments below if you know of stories and locations such as this one. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe, and jump out to Patreon, help support the channel. Inspection of the piece of paper that was left with the pocketbook, knife, and coat read, from P. Kess, Rax, PA, a location I can't find in any records, John Coxus Jonas, Joseph Mazanak, Alpha, New Jersey. There is no information on if any of this was investigated further or helped in providing a way to identify the man who hanged himself from the tree. Now, here's where we get into some trouble with history. According to one recount in the Altoona Tribune, the day after the finding of the body, the man was cut down into a wagon and hauled to the almshouse for interment, which brings to question, why is this marker here? Well, that is where the story forks over to what was stated by the undertaker's sons, Luther and George, as well as Samuel Keller, who was one of the caretakers for this stretch of highway. According to their story, the body was taken down for examination. While it was being examined, the two Liebgott boys and Keller dug a shallow grave about 150 yards away from the shoulder of the road. The body was interred in the grave shortly after the examination. How true are their stories? Well, true enough that from July 1905 until his death, Samuel Keller could not stop thinking about the man he buried on the side of the road. He took it upon himself to caretake the gravesite, and on every Memorial Day for 30 years, he placed an American flag at the head of the burial mound. Samuel even placed the burden of caretaking of this site onto his son to be performed once he was gone. Flash forward to 1929, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation was expanding the roads in certain locations and building realignments of these roads to make them straighter or more easily cared for, and unfortunately, this road was on the hit list for a major expansion. When the survey was completed of where the new highway would span, it was found that it would travel directly over and decimate as well as desecrate the lone grave of the Alleghenies. Samuel Keller was still employed by the state as the highway caretaker and made it a concerted effort to assure the grave was respectfully disinterred and cared for accordingly. When the site was exhumed, all but bones, buckles, and casket hardware remained in the site, as well as a single dime, which must have been deep in one of the man's pockets and was missed during the examination. The exhumed bones were sent to a forensic pathologist, and the determination was that nothing was harmed or abnormal, reaffirming that this man did not die of foul play. Everything that was exhumed was placed into a small wooden casket box, except for the dime. Keller decided he would hold on to the dime for the effort and remembrance of this dedicated life's work toward this site. Approximately 50 feet away on the southern side of the road is where a new grave was dug and the box was lowered. Another odd fact about this site is that no matter what the weather is in this area, if you look at a Doppler of the clouds for this particular site, you will always see a cloud directly over this grave in the echo. something that's always attracted me to this site from before I even did videos. Always wondering why this site always harbors a cloud in a Doppler scan. It's not exactly known what happened to Samuel Keller's son in regards to caretaking of this property. It is said over time that it was sometimes cared for in the 80s and sometimes not. So we don't know if it is people who come to visit or people walking the 6 to 10 trail. What we do know is that by 2018 the site was in disrepair and the original sign that was placed had now started to rot and was unreadable. And a young man named Joel Koss happened by and was moved by this loss of care for such a site. So he took it upon himself, and with his own funds, time and effort, to clean up the site and replace the original sign with a new one, appointing himself indirectly as the new caretaker of the site. I had the opportunity to meet with Joel and his lovely puppy and ask him why did he do this. He looked at me blankly as if I was dim and expressed what I could only read as someone stating, "Why wouldn't you do this?" What he told me was that if we don't make an effort to take care of these types of sites, then this type of history will be lost forever. It was one of the warmest responses I've ever heard from someone who is not a historian by trade, but like me, a keeper of the history flame, a man dedicated to keeping alive the memory of who we once were, and as you see, still are. If you haven't already, remember to click like on this video and to subscribe for more ODDySEEy stories of who we once were. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.